Hey everyone, Spider-Man the Animated Series is truly a classic. Everything about it is great, except for one thing that fans have been wondering about for years. In the last episode, Spider-Man teams up with Madam Web to search for Mary Jane, who got lost somewhere in the multiverse. We have all heard the question, did Spider-Man finally find Mary Jane, multiple times, but in this video I will finally give you the answer. John Semper, the producer and main writer of the animated series, has finally finished the script for the 66th and final episode, and he has shared it with us. The script is 92 pages long, divided into 6 acts, and if the series ever gets fully produced, it will be about 40 minutes long. Without further ado, let's dive in. So, the 66th episode of Spider-Man's animated series, Peter finds Mary Jane. The episode starts with Spider-Man and Madam Web flying through a time portal and seeing MJ. Spider-Man almost catches her, but Madam Web's chair starts acting weird. MJ disappears into the portal, and Madam Web and Spidey end up in one of the parallel realities, in the middle of nowhere. Because Madam Web's chair broke, she vanishes and asks Peter to find a way to fix it. Peter looks around and sees nobody. Just in case, Spider-Man leaves a spider bug on the chair and starts wandering through the desert. After a while, in dense fog, he encounters an old locomotive speeding by. Spidey, happy that somebody's living here after all, jumps on it. It brings Peter to Victorian-era London, and what the newspaper reveal, it's September 1888 in this reality. Almost immediately in London, Spider-Man confronts Carnage, who is attacking civilians and claims he came to London through Tony Stark's portal. Turns out, he has already killed several people, and here they call him Jack the Ripper. Spider-Man engages in a fight with him, during which Carnage breaks his web shooters, defeats him, and decides not to kill him yet, so he has someone to fight in this reality. Spider-Man leaves the battleground, and people on the streets think he is the mysterious Jack the Ripper. Parker finds suitable steampunk-style clothes for himself, but then changes back into his Spider-Man suit, and because his web shooters aren't working, he moves through the city via rooftops. Meanwhile, through the time portal in the same London, Mary Jane arrives. She doesn't remember what happened to her, and she is aided by Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, famous victims of Jack the Ripper. It's also revealed that in London, there are alternative versions of J. Jonah Jameson and Flash Thompson, with Flash acting as Jonah's assistant here. In the city, Spider-Man encounters the Green Goblin, who flies past him on a glider. Spidey thinks he stole money from the bank and tries to stop him. Interestingly, the Green Goblin has no idea who Spider-Man is and doesn't understand what he is saying. Together on the glider, they fly into a circus filled with smoke. Goblin manages to jump off the glider and disappears. Spidey gets attacked by big snakes and a griffin at the circus. Peter defeats the griffin, which turns out to be a robot. After that, Mysterio emerges from the smoke. Spidey quickly defeats Mysterio with his spider sense. Then the Green Goblin reappears and shows Spidey that he was just disturbing flyers from the circus around the city. He takes off his mask, revealing Harry Osborn underneath. Mysterio turns out to be Quentin Beck under the mask, and says they're just doing business and don't want to harm anyone. Spidey also shows his real face and admits his mistake. That evening, they have a dinner at the circus. Peter proposes a deal to them. He will catch Jack the Ripper for their show if Quentin fixes his web shooters. Mysterio is happy with the offer and agrees right away. The next day, they head to an inventor who turns out to be Herbert Wells, known in our reality as a science fiction writer. Parker's spider sense goes off at Wells' house, and he discovers a time machine that Herbert has been working on for a long time. Peter realizes that he and Madam Web fell out of the portal because of Wells' interference in time. At Peter's request, Herbert shuts down the time machine to avoid causing more harm to the multiverse. Using his spider bug tracker device, Spider-Man leads everyone to Madam Web's chair and explains that they are facing a working time machine. He suggests Wells fix it, and he sets off to research for Mary Jane, suspecting she might also be in London. An interesting idea pops into his head, which he immediately decides to check out. For this, he heads to Baker Street. His spider sense doesn't fail him, and there he meets Sherlock Holmes himself and Dr. Watson. Sherlock Holmes deduces that Mary Jane should be sought in Whitechapel, an area of London. Peter thanks the detective and leaves. Holmes and Watson decide to follow Peter, thinking he looks suspicious and is hiding something. From afar, they see Peter climbing up a wall, and after that, they also decide to head to Whitechapel to figure out what's going on. In the evening, Mary Jane, Elizabeth, and Catherine also arrive in Whitechapel, hoping Mary will finally understand how she ended up here. J. Jonah Jameson and Flash also head there, busy writing a story about Jack the Ripper. Mary meets Flash Thompson and is very happy to see him. However, Flash doesn't recognize her. Elizabeth and Catherine decide to leave her to talk to Flash and continue on through Whitechapel. Carnage attacks them and brutally kills. Right after that, he attacks Flash and Mary, but hesitates when he sees and recognizes Mary Jane. Finally, Spider-Man himself appears in Whitechapel. He takes off his mask, says he is Peter Parker, and kisses Mary Jane. After that, her memory returns. Carnage attacks Spider-Man, kidnaps MJ, and flies away with her. He dashes across the rooftops of London while MJ tries to escape the monster's clutches. Suddenly, a portal appears in front of them, from which emerges a terrifying giant spider. The spider leaps onto Carnage, causing him to fall on the ground. Mysterio emerges from the smoke. 6 enormous demonic creatures emerge from the dense fog around them. Spider-Man arrives. Suddenly, Mysterio gets shot, and he grabs his arm. It turns out to be J. Jonah Jameson who shot him. He is glad he got his gun back, and says he will rid London of monsters and put an end to the series of killings in Whitechapel. But Jameson is stopped by Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Because Mysterio was injured, his demons disappear one by one. Carnage realizes it was an illusion, grabs Mary Jane and flees. Quentin asks Spider-Man to ignore his wound and continue chasing Carnage. Peter webs up Jameson so he won't harm anyone else and sets off to find Mary Jane with Carnage. Inspired by Sherlock Holmes' deduction, he figures out where he can find Carnage, on Tower Bridge, where he heads. Spider-Man climbs one of the towers, and turns out to be right. Carnage comes to him, holding Mary Jane. After a brief conversation, Carnage throws MJ off the bridge. In the air, she is suddenly caught by the Green Goblin on his glider. Spider-Man and Carnage start fighting on the bridge, during which Carnage manages to tie up Spidey with his symbiote. Suddenly, a goblin bomb explodes near him and Carnage, and the villain falls down. Spider-Man manages to escape. He comes up with a clever plan. He jumps off the bridge and swings through the streets of London on his web. Carnage follows him. The Green Goblin helps Parker and tries to bomb Carnage, but he flies away when he runs out of bombs. Spider-Man jumps onto a tall building and climbs up. Carnage doesn't give up and climbs after him. They climb almost to the top of the building, where Carnage transforms his hand into a set of knives and prepares to kill Spider-Man. Suddenly, it turns out that Spidey lured Carnage to Big Ben. It's midnight and the clock tower starts ringing loudly. Each toll of the bell causes the symbiote to separate more and more from Cletus Cassidy until it finally completely detaches from him and presumably dissolves from the unbearable sound. Cassidy says he can't live without the symbiote and jumps off Big Ben. Spider-Man, not expecting this turn of events, tries to catch him with his web, but misses. Cassidy falls into the River Thames. Spider-Man thinks that Cassidy is dead. He then retrieves the camera he had previously placed on the tower, which had been taking pictures all this time. He plans to develop the photos with the so-called Jack the Ripper and Herbert Wells, and give them to Quentin and Harry for their circus as a reward for their help. At night, Peter and Mary Jane come home to Herbert Wells. It turns out that Quentin is in the hospital and Harry is looking after him. Jameson, on the other hand, ended up in the police station, where he was escorted by Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Herbert Wells says he seems to have figured out how Madame Web's chair works, and turns it on. At that moment, spider sense starts tingling. Everyone turns around and sees Carnage, who survived, breaking into the house through the window. He takes Mary Jane hostage and explains that the symbiote found its way into the Thames, where it saved Cletus from death. It restored his strength, and then Carnage followed Spidey to Herbert Wells' house. Carnage sits in Madame Web's chair, holding MJ hostage. He presses the buttons, and the chair starts vibrating heavily, which clearly doesn't sit well with his symbiote. Mary Jane manages to break free, and she runs to Peter. Carnage grows larger, his body starts flickering, and he becomes transparent. Eventually he explodes and disappears. However, the chair remains intact and undamaged. Moments later, Madame Web appears in the chair. She explains that after it was activated, the chair found her across the entire multiverse and brought her specifically to this dimension. It turns out that Carnage was torn apart, because only Madame Web can control the chair. Peter takes off his mask, saying he still can't believe he found Mary Jane. They kiss each other. Together, they are once again sucked into the time vortex. Suddenly, Peter Parker and Madame Web find themselves outside of time and space. Madame Web tells him that Mary Jane has been safely taken home. She wanted to show Spider-Man something. Many oval rifts appear around them, through which various parallel universes can be seen. In each of them, there is a Spider-Man. Madame Web shows Peter the reality where Spider-Man is Miles Morales, the reality with Spider-Gwen, and the one where Spider-Man is Aunt May. Madame Web says that in all realities, Spider abilities turn people into heroes who protect the weak and innocent. She asks Peter not to forget that with great power comes great responsibility, and she sends Peter back to his reality. Spider-Man sits on the gargoyle and says the very phrase he first uttered in this animated series.
New York City. If only everything down there was really as peaceful as it looks from up here.
He jumps off the building and swings through the streets of the metropolis on his web. And this was the end of Spider-Man the animated series. But you, my dear viewers, click on the like button, subscribe to the channel and write what you think about it in the comments below. We'll see you soon.
Over the past year or so, Marvel has been dramatically expanding the powers and abilities of Miles Morales, to the point that he's now able to focus it into a lightning sword, like some kind of lightsaber-wielding spider Jedi. Well, now in Giant-Size Spider-Man issue 1, it was revealed that he is developing his spider sense to the extent that it can be used like some kind of X-ray vision. Obviously, we're not talking about Superman level here, but it's a form of X-ray vision nonetheless. Essentially, it appears to be an advanced form of spider sense that he is still trying to master, which is a very cool idea. We first see it at the very beginning of the issue as Miles is working with Misty Knight to take down Black Obsidian and his goons. They received a tip from Mayor Luke Cage about a possible cache of illegal high-tech weapons Obsidian's organization was selling on the street, and we see Miles using his stealth ability to break into the warehouse while Misty is staking things out from a nearby rooftop. Then as Miles is hanging upside down going through the crates of weapons, his spider sense goes off, and his inner dialogue tells us that he has been using unique breathing techniques to focus his spider sense. Miles then says that those therapy sessions were initially just a way to reset his spider sense after it had gone haywire, but in the process he realized that if he really focused, his spider sense would expand to the point that he could almost see the danger. And this is when we get our first look at this advanced version of his ability, as he uses it to look through the wall in front of him, revealing several X-ray-like skeletal images of Obsidian and his crew entering the building. What I really like here is that they're introducing these new abilities for Miles slowly and letting him develop them over time rather than just suddenly presenting him as this much more powerful version of the character all at once. I'm not sure I love that they're making him more powerful than Peter Parker's Spider-Man, but at least they're making it interesting. Anyway, Miles cloaks himself as the gang rushes in and starts gathering the weapons, but just as Miles jumps in to stop them, Venom bursts through the wall, wrecks everybody, and then goes after Black Obsidian. But Obsidian and his crew get the upper hand on Venom by using the high-tech energy weapons against him, at which point Miles fully realizes that these are weapons created by his new arch-enemy, Rabble. So he jumps in to save Venom, and the two join forces to beat the crap out of Obsidian and his thugs. And this is where we see Miles use his advanced spider sense for a second time, because after Venom restrains Black Obsidian, he lifts him in the air and is about to kill him with a blade he formed with his right hand. We then see Morales ignite his lightning sword to block Venom's blade while simultaneously trying to talk him down. And as the fight between Miles and Venom escalates, Venom blasts him with symbiote goo in the face, blinding him. So Miles focuses his spider sense to locate Venom and his movements. And just as Venom is about to tackle him, Miles says, "Venom, my man, just cause I'm blinded don't mean I can't see," as he then unloads an uppercut to Venom's jaw and slams him to the ground. Now, Venom is able to recover and almost defeats Miles before Misty Knight shows up to help Miles out of the jam. But the main focus here is that all of Miles' power seems to be evolving and growing. And this first stage of an advanced spider sense, which may eventually turn into full-blown X-ray vision, is the latest massive upgrade for the character. I'm curious about where the writers and Marvel are going to take this ultimately, but they may be drawing inspiration from spiders in the real world. They have some of the best vision in the animal kingdom, including great night vision and the ability to see through UVA and and UVB rays. So maybe they see that as a good reason to take spider sense to a new level. It also makes you wonder what other changes we might see to Miles' power set, and whether we'll see any of these evolving powers extend to other heroes in the Spider-Verse. As always, we'll just have to wait and see, but clearly we'll need to keep a close eye on Miles Morales because he could be on his way to becoming the most.
And they mostly doing this for Miles because they really can't change Peter too much because, you know, Peter's got his own history, so they don't like changing his history now. So, but Miles, they said we can write anything into Miles, so we'll change Miles up a little bit, let him get a little razzle dazzle. But hell, they had to upgrade Spider-Man because you finna see the upgrades that Venom's got. Shouts out to Venom, you already seen a little bit. Well, you know the next video is about him, in other words.
Powerful Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse. But that closes things out for this episode. So what do you guys think about all these changes and upgrades to Miles Morales Spider-Man? Let us know down in the comments. Otherwise, we'll see you next time when we talk about the return of Megatron.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with the Venom Civil War, and the ending of this is either going to blow your mind or you're going to hate it. We'll find out. So what this does is this opens up with Eddie Brock as Bedlam fighting Bedlam. So for all the new people here, what in the world is going on? Well, number one, you will find a link to the Venom playlist at the end of this video. And two, the best way to describe what's happening is to really just explain it, right? So when Eddie Brock, as the King in Black, meaning he has control over all the symbiotes in his universe, when he died, he went to what appeared to be an afterlife, literally a place that was composed entirely of symbiote matter. And that within this place, there were these other symbiotes, that you had Bedlam and Wild and Tyro and so on and so forth. Each one of these different symbiotes represented basically Eddie Brock as he was transitioning through what we would call the 5 stages of grief, and then eventually going on to join what was called the eventuality, which is essentially this kind of multiversal being that is the result of every King in Black across the multiverse merging into one entity. Now, along this path, Eddie Brock will become a guy named Meridius, which is, by our standards of measurement, the sum total of everything a King in Black could possibly be. Full control over their powers, full control over all symbiote matter in existence. It's as powerful as he's ever going to be. The kicker here is that Meridius did not want to join the eventuality. He wanted to conquer all of creation. And so Eddie Brock had basically been working before he became Meridius, literally racing against the clock in order to find a way to, one, stop himself from becoming Meridius, and two, find a way to defeat Meridius before he could essentially conquer all of creation. Now, because this always happens with every King in Black, what Eddie Brock did is he found that he could actually untether himself to this fate, quite literally walk away. And that in doing so, he would not have to become Meridius, which is exactly what he did. But he also did it with the Bedlam symbiote. And that's the reason why the two of them here are fighting against all the other symbiotes. Because what this fight does is he's like tearing these guys apart, right? Like literally, it's a cool explanation that you get here. That one of them says, I'm Eddie Brock, and the main Eddie himself, we'll call him Eddie Prime, that he says, we all are, dummy, just different versions from different timelines branching off from the original, which is essentially him. He says, for instance, I'm the Eddie Brock who just tore your fool head off, which of course is him just kind of, musing with this guy. But again, as these dudes are watching, literally as Tyro and Wild are watching this fight unfold, they come to the realization they're not destined to become Meridius, that it was a great lie that Meridius came up in order to essentially keep them from challenging him for power. Because the reality here is that they are all seemingly equal in their abilities, in what they can do. Yes, they're all Kings in Black, but the only thing that differentiates Eddie Brock from Tyro and Wild and Bedlam is either some measure of heightened aggression or how they perceive themselves. And that's basically it. But by them appearing appearing here in this realm that was created by Meridius, right? Their final form, essentially, that Meridius put forward this ideology: you are lesser than I am, right? I am not really your god, but I am what you will eventually become. And that in that form, I am more powerful than all of you. But that's not the case. The ability to manipulate symbiote matter is the ability to manipulate symbiote matter. It would be like saying that Iron Man with the Infinity Gauntlet is less powerful than Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. It doesn't make any sense. A person wielding a gauntlet is a person wielding a gauntlet, and that's it. The ultimate nullifier is a whole different discussion though. But back on track. But the thing here is that as they start to realize this, specifically Wild, he says, then I don't have to become you. Like, there was never a cage. We're free, Tyro. We're all free. And Tyro responds as saying, after everything we've done, everything that was done to us, you want all of that to be for nothing. I'm meant to become Meridius. It's my destiny to rule this garden. I don't want to be free. It can't be for nothing. So again, that's where all of this stuff comes from. It's how all of this stuff functions, because Eddie Brock will become Tyro before he becomes Meridius. And can we all just kind of look at Tyro for a second and just acknowledge the fact that what he has on his chest kind of makes him look like he's part of the Lantern Corps from DC Comics? He's not, but it'd be dope if he was. But Tyro ends up going after Eddie Prime. And when that happens, the Finnegan symbiote emerges. Now, Finnegan represents denial more than anything else. When Eddie Brock first died and first got here, he denied the fact that he was actually supposed to be here. And in doing so, became Finnegan, right? So that's kind of how this process works. Tyro is the version of Eddie Brock who more or less accepts his fate, and now he lusts for the power of Meridius. So again, that's kind of how this process goes from one to the other, leading to Meridius itself. And so in fact, even when Tyro and Finnegan are talking to each other, that Tyro refers to Finnegan almost like he's somebody else, like he's a wholly different person that is not even what Finnegan used to be. And so as Finnegan and Tyro are going back and forth with each other, Tyro refers to Finnegan as if he is someone that is not him, because Finnegan is what Tyro was at some point in time. Like you, when you were 13 years old. Your 13-year-old self is not a wholly different person. It's just you some number of years ago. And so that's why Finnegan responds and says, sniveling, I'm you, you're me. I was praying for this, for a chance to break the loop, to prevent Dylan's death, Dylan being the son of Eddie Brock. And you turn that down. What's wrong with you? And that's when Tyro's like, wait a minute, prevent what? And he was like, you idiot. Dylan's not dead, you moron. He's stronger now. He's got his own hive, his own army. And when he's ready, he will be the way in which Meridius escapes. And the response of Eddie, that's not his job. Because one of the things to know is that Dylan, the son of Eddie Brock, is a king in black without truly playing the role of a king in black. And what I mean by that is the king in black is as much power passed down from one person to the next as it is a mantle passed down from one person to the next. The original king in black, the first king in black in every universe, is always Null the symbiote god, because he's the one that creates the symbiotes in the first place. He creates them, he commands them, he controls them. But in every universe, Venom, whether it's Eddie Brock, seemingly it always is Eddie Brock, but whether it's Eddie or potentially some other host, they always destroy Null, and they always replace Null and become the king in black going forward. The difference between that and Dylan is Dylan, because his mom was possessed by the Venom symbiote at the time that he was born, at least specifically within the main Marvel universe. Anne Weying is the person that I'm talking about, that Dylan was born with the ability to manipulate symbiotes because he is part symbiote. And so in effect, he is the way in which Meridius can escape his fate, because Meridius can use Dylan to control all symbiotes in existence, because Meridius can only leave this realm temporarily. He can't stay gone for too long. And even if he does, he can't necessarily control all things because he would have to contend with the power of Dylan, and Dylan, of course, would more or less run against him. But by manipulating Dylan, controlling Dylan, tricking Dylan into believing that Meridius is his friend, right, a good guy, then he can use him, and with the two of them working together, Meridius can take over Dylan and then rule all of creation. And so that's where Eddie says he should never have become some symbiote warrior. Again, speaking about his son Dylan, with his own hive. We should never have put him in that position. He's not a tool, he's a kid. He's our son. It's not his job to help us, it's our job to help him. And if you're too far gone to see that, you need to sit this one out. And Eddie Brock kills this guy on the spot. And that's where he looks at Wild and says, what about you, man? Like, do you have any smart remarks? And he's like, nope, I'm just watching the show, checking it out, just seeing what's happening. And in fact, you even have both versions of the Bedlam symbiotes that have actually merged their heads together, and now they're involved in a kind of like mental battle with each other, right? A lot of this is just because the Bedlam symbiotes are kind of dumb. They kind of reflect Eddie Brock when he was like first becoming Venom, and he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, right? Just some lumbering beast fighting Spider-Man. But in the midst of all this, Meridius emerges. Now, this is the part that you are either going to agree with or you're going to hate, but it is going to require an explanation. So, what happens when Meridius emerges here is he taunts Eddie Brock and even the other symbiotes that are with him, right? He was like, I'm not very happy. I am not happy at all. It's not that you tried to kill me. I can respect that. It's not that you've evidently broken free of the cage of events. I'm envious, but it shows it can be done. I can free myself from the eventuality, and I will. That's not why I'm mad, Eddie. I'm mad because you're so stupid, because you still don't know what the garden is, do you? You think it's dead symbiote matter that I shaped like clay. There's no such thing as dead symbiote matter. All symbiote is alive, Eddie, just unclaimed by a mind. I didn't sculpt it, I took it. I am the garden, Brock. This is my body, this is my blood. And what I giveth, I can taketh away. And so what he does is he snatches the symbiotes off of everybody else, including Eddie himself, right? Like Eddie still has control over symbiote matter, and that's where he and the King in Black are absolute equals, right? He and Meridius are identical in terms of power. And he says, you're alone, Brock, and for all your tricks, you're only human. Twist, turn, resurrect, all you like. Carbon-based cells will always lose to symbiote because the flesh is weak, but you're not the only one who can make symbiotes dance. We're both the King in Black. You think any goo in this garden will listen to you over me? I've got the power, Eddie, and centuries of experience. There isn't one mind in all of space and time that can subvert my will. The kicker about all this is that in the middle of it, suddenly his nose starts bleeding. And it's like, okay, what in the world is going on? And then like his chest starts bleeding. And Eddie Brock looks at it and he's like, is that blood? And like Meridius's only comment is like, my chest hurts, right? And so you have Wild who's looking at this, right? His symbiote form kind of returned to him and it's like, you're kidding. How does a 30-foot tall mega symbiote with Hollywood teeth have a heart attack? And the response of Eddie, I don't think that's what this is. That's not blood. It's just red. And that's where Meridius is like, everything is red. Red as carnage, right? And carnage busts out of the chest of Meridius and it's just like, red as carnage. And he's just like, your faces, right? You know, I could have sworn I saw a giant hand burning candles for fingers, a great burning engine. Now there's a god, I thought. So I dove into the black water and went for a swim. But instead of there, I'm here in your heaven, Eddie. And so this is the important thing, right? This is where the confusion has come into play for everybody. And it makes perfect sense because this was the natural ending to the story, Death of the Venomverse, when Carnage was going through the entirety of the multiverse, tracking down every version of Venom he could possibly find, killing them, absorbing their powers, and basically nullifying any weakness for himself so he could track down this version of Eddie Brock, kill him, replace him as the King in Black, and seize control of the entire universe, which he undoubtedly would do. The kicker about all this is the current Carnage run flies in the face of all of that. That while he was out there on this mission, Carnage came back to Earth and basically started forming a kind of cult for himself in order to establish himself as God. So I don't know if like Marvel forgot. I have no idea what's going on here. The reality is that we kind of have to wait and see how the Carnage solo series unfolds in order to see where this takes place. Because maybe this takes place immediately after the death of Venomverse, or maybe it takes place after the current Carnage series. We don't know. But the important thing is Eddie and all these guys are flabbergasted. Their minds are blown in seeing Carnage here because they all understand the clear and present danger that Carnage represents, right? Where he says, Meridius, that's the big one's name, isn't it? And he's like, big Eddies and smaller Eddies and little stirring cheese Eddies. It's like a smorgasbord. Why'd I end up in him? I wonder, some past connections, do we link up in the future, both at once? These are the questions I have to ask myself now that I'm a god. Did I mention that I'm a god, Eddie? And so one of the symbiotes goes to attack and Carnage stops this guy on the spot and stabs him in the chest. And then in turn, like this dude just gets absorbed. Like that's literally it, right? He just takes the entirety of this guy's power. And that in turn, Carnage actually reveals that he's the one that stabbed Dylan, right? That he's actually the reason why Dylan's dead. He says, I murdered your boy, old man. Dylan's dead and you're next, which just leaves the showdown between Carnage and Venom.